Before the money and fame. She found him broken, and sleeping in his car. Now he's the most powerful man in Seoul, and she's the only secret he's kept from everyone. The night Amara almost walked past him, the rain was coming down so hard she could barely see 2 feet in front of her. She had just finished a double shift at the convenience store on Itaewon-ro, her uniform damp at the collar, her sneakers making that embarrassing squelching sound with every step. She was tired in the kind of way that sits behind your eyes and makes everything feel slightly unreal. She almost didn't notice the figure hunched inside the old Hyundai parked halfway onto the curb, windows fogged, one wiper broken, the other one squeaking against glass that was already too blurry to see through. But she noticed the hand. A man's hand pressed flat against the inside of the window, fingers spread like he was trying to hold something in. Or hold something out. Amara stopped walking. She stood in the rain for 3 full seconds, bag clutched to her chest, heart doing something it had no business doing for a stranger in a broken-down car. And then, because she had always been the kind of woman who stopped when everyone else kept walking, she knocked on the glass. The hand disappeared. A face appeared. Dark eyes. Sharp jaw. A cut above his left brow that had dried badly. He looked at her like she was either the worst thing that had happened to him tonight or the only good thing. She couldn't tell which. He cracked the window 2 inches. "Are you okay?" she asked in Korean, then switched instinctively to English. "Do you need help?" He stared at her for a long moment. "You should keep walking." "I knocked, so clearly I don't want to." Another pause. Rain drummed against the car roof between them. "I'm fine," he said. She looked at the cut on his face. She looked at the way his knuckles were white against the steering wheel even though the car clearly wasn't running. She looked at the crumpled paper bag on the passenger seat that she was almost certain had nothing in it. "You're not fine," she said simply. "But I'll leave you alone if you want me to." He didn't tell her to leave. That was how it started. Not with money. Not with power. Not with the cars and the penthouse and the name that would one day make boardrooms go quiet just from the sound of it. It started with a woman standing in the rain and a man too proud to ask for help but just broken enough to let her stay. His name was John Hyunwoo. And the night Amara Mensa knocked on his car window, he had exactly 4001, a dead phone, and 3 enemies who thought he was already finished. They were almost right. If you're new to this channel and you love an emotional, dramatic, deep love story with everything, romance, betrayal, revenge, and all the tension in between, you are exactly where you need to be. Let's get into it. Amara was 24 and had been in Seoul for 2 years. She'd come from Accra on a scholarship that covered tuition but barely touched living expenses, which meant 2 jobs, 1 tiny room in a semi-basement apartment in Mapogu, and a lifestyle that left very little room for anything that wasn't survival. She sent money home every month. She studied international business every morning. She smiled at customers every night. She was not looking for anything complicated. And yet, she brought Hyunwoo ramen from the convenience store. She sat in the passenger seat of his cold, dead car and watched him eat it too fast like a man who hadn't had a proper meal in days. He didn't say thank you right away. He just ate. She didn't push. When he finally looked at her, something in his expression had shifted, like a wall that had cracked without quite falling. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "Because you looked like you needed company more than privacy," she said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You're strange. I've been told." His story came out in pieces, not all at once. Not that night and not even the next week. But she learned things slowly, the way you learn a person when you're not trying to extract them but just choosing to be near them. She learned that he was 27. That he had grown up in Busan in a family that had once had money and then catastrophically hadn't. That he'd come to Seoul at 19 with a plan, and that the plan had been working, a startup, a small tech investment firm, a partnership with 2 men he had trusted completely, until 6 months ago when those 2 men had taken everything, restructured the company under a shell entity, and pushed him out with nothing but a legal battle he couldn't afford to fight. His name was off the contracts. His signature had been forged on a document that waived his equity. He had no money for lawyers. He had no family to fall back on. He had a car that still ran some days and a phone that worked when he remembered to charge it at the PC cafe down the street. He was not finished. He was very clear about that. "I will get it back," he told Amara one evening, about 2 weeks after they'd met. They were sitting on a bench near the Han River because she'd told him fresh air was free and he'd rolled his eyes but come anyway. Every single thing they took. And more. She believed him. She didn't know why. There was nothing logical about believing a man who was sleeping in his car and eating convenience store food in the rain. But there was something in Hyunwoo that was different from broken. He wasn't broken. He was compressed. Like something being pressurized before it exploded. She believed him. What she didn't do was let herself feel too much too soon. She was practical, Amara. She had to be. So she told herself this was just kindness. Just two lonely people in a big city. Just company. She lied to herself extremely well for about 3 weeks. The moment she stopped being able to lie was a Tuesday. She'd had a terrible day. A professor had handed back a paper with a grade she didn't deserve and a comment that felt slightly pointed in a way she couldn't prove. She'd gone straight to her shift without eating. By the time she got off at 11, she was running on nothing but stubbornness and spite. She walked to where Hyunwoo usually parked. She didn't think about why she walked there first before going home. She just did. He was awake. He took one look at her face through the window, got out of the car without a word, and walked to the Pojangmaka 2 blocks down where an older woman sold tteokbokki and oeting until midnight. He ordered for both of them. He paid, and she knew it cost him something. Every coin he spent cost him something, and he set the food down in front of her and said, "Talk." She talked. She told him about the paper and the professor and the specific exhaustion of working twice as hard as everyone around you and still being looked at like you'd only gotten this far by accident. She told him about her mother calling that morning asking if she was eating well and how she'd said yes even though the answer was not really. She told him things she hadn't told anyone in Seoul because she hadn't had anyone in Seoul to tell. He listened. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just listened with his whole face, the way some people can't do even when they're trying. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "They see what's on the surface. They don't see what you're building. That's actually a tactical advantage." She looked at him. "You just made my terrible day into a business strategy." "I did. Is it working?" She laughed. She hadn't meant to, but it came out of her completely. And he looked at her when she laughed with something in his eyes that he didn't bother to hide quickly enough. That was the moment. That was the very specific, ordinary, impossible moment when everything changed between them. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't even say anything about it. They walked back to his car and she went home on the last subway and they both pretended that nothing had shifted. But it had. They both knew it had. He got a job 3 days later. Night security at an office building in Gangnam. It paid barely enough, but it was something. He moved out of his car and into a gazawan, a tiny study room barely big enough for a single mattress and a desk. He showed her photos of it like he was showing her a penthouse. She made appropriate sounds and did not once point out that it was about the size of her bathroom. He was proud. She understood proud. They started spending more time together deliberately, not accidentally. Sunday afternoons when she didn't work. Late nights when his shift ended early. She would come to his building sometimes, wait on the steps, and they'd walk along the river while the city was still asleep and talk about everything, his plans, her plans, the future they were each building with their bare hands. He told her once, very seriously, that he had identified 3 different pathways back into the investment world and he was working all 3 simultaneously. She told him, equally seriously, that he was the most intense person she had ever met. "Is that bad?" he asked. "It's very attractive," she said, and then immediately looked away. He caught her arm. Not roughly. Just, he caught it. She turned back. He was looking at her with that compressed thing again, but this time it wasn't about business. He said her name. Just her name. Amara. In Korean cadence, the way he'd learned to say it because she'd told him once that her name meant grace in Chui and he'd never mispronounced it after that. He kissed her there on the bridge over the Han River at 5 in the morning with the sky just starting to go from black to gray. He kissed her slowly, like he had thought about it carefully and decided it was worth the risk. She kissed him back like she'd been waiting for him to decide. That was the beginning. But beginnings in stories like this are never just beginnings. Because somewhere across the city, in a glass tower in Gangnam with his name on the door, a name that should have been John Hyunwoo's name, a man named Shin Do-kyung was looking at quarterly reports and feeling very comfortable. Very secure. Very certain that the boy he destroyed 2 years ago was gone and staying gone. Shin Do-kyung was 43, polished, and deeply, specifically evil in the way that only men who've never faced consequences can be. He had taken Hyunwoo's company not because he needed it but because Hyunwoo had been right about the market shift and Do-kyung had wanted to be the one who was right. He had forged documents, bribed a notary, and used a third partner, a quiet, compliant man named Oh Sung-ji, to execute the legal burial. And then he had moved on. Built the empire. Worn the suits. Given the interviews. He had not thought about John Hyunwoo in almost a year. He should have kept thinking about him. Because Hyunwoo, working security at night and studying patent law in the morning and building something very quiet and very deliberate in between, had not forgotten a single detail. He had a journal. Amara had seen it once, not the contents but the existence of it, a thick black notebook that he kept in the inside pocket of his jacket. When she asked about it he said it was where he kept what he was working toward. She didn't push. She understood that some things you carry close to your chest until you're ready to use them. What she didn't know yet, what would come later and hit her like a train, was that she was the one thing he hadn't written in that journal. Because she was the one thing that wasn't strategy. She was the one real thing. And he didn't know what to do with that. 8 months into their relationship, Hyunwoo got a break. A genuine, earned, no one can take credit for this but him break. A small venture capital firm in Uedo had been watching the fintech market for months. Their junior analyst, a woman named Park Ji-soo who had excellent instincts and too much institutional caution above her, had flagged a gap that matched exactly what Hyunwoo had been quietly developing. Through a mutual contact in the tech cafe community, the kind of networking that happens when people with big ideas and no money share the same cheap Wi-Fi, Hyunwoo got 20 minutes in front of Ji-soo's boss. He turned 20 minutes into 2 hours. He walked out with seed funding. Not a lot. But enough to rent an actual office. Enough to hire one assistant. Enough to register the new company, not in his own name yet, because he was still legally exposed from the dispute with Do-kyung, but in a structure that a corporate attorney helped him build with careful precision. He came to Amara's apartment that night. He knocked. When she opened the door he was standing there in his security guard jacket, not yet having had time to change, holding a paper cup of coffee and looking like a man who had just run a very long race and seen the finish line for the first time. She knew before he said anything. She stepped aside and let him in and he sat at her small kitchen table and told her everything. She listened with her hand over her mouth because she could feel how much this meant, how much was sitting inside this moment. When he finished she didn't say congratulations right away. She said, "You did it." "The beginning of it," he said. "No," she said firmly. "This part. You did this part." He reached across the table and took her hand. He held it for a long time without saying anything else. She could feel something trembling under his surface, all that compressed pressure releasing in millimeters. She squeezed back. They sat like that for a long time. What came next happened fast. Faster than either of them expected. Hyunwoo had spent 2 years being invisible, and he had used every moment of that invisibility to prepare something that, once it moved quickly. The fintech platform he built addressed a specific gap in cross-border remittance, particularly between East Asia and West Africa, and Amara, without fully understanding what she was doing, had contributed more to its architecture than she knew. Years of sending money home, of dealing with the friction and the fees and the delays, of watching her mother wait 3 days for funds that should have arrived in hours, had made her fluent in the problem in a way that Hyunwoo had absorbed and built into the solution without quite calling it collaboration. He should have called it collaboration. That detail would matter later. The platform launched quietly. Then less quietly. Within 6 months it had users in 12 countries. Within 8 months, 2 major banks had requested partnership meetings. Within a year, the company, registered now under Hyunwoo's name, the legal dispute with Do-kyung settled through a complex mechanism that the attorney referred to simply as leverage obtained, was valued at something that required more zeros than Amara was comfortable looking at. And Hyunwoo changed. Not all at once. Not in the dramatic, obvious way that happens in stories where people become cartoon villains the moment money touches them. It was slower than that. Quieter. The way erosion works, you don't see it happening, you only see what's left. He got busy. Genuinely, legitimately, understandably busy. She understood that. She was finishing her degree and working her final months at the store, and she was proud of him, so proud that sometimes it sat in her chest like a physical thing. She understood busy. What she didn't understand was when busy became a wall. When his assistant started answering messages on his behalf. When the Sunday afternoons disappeared first, then the late-night calls, then the small Tuesday texts that used to just say, "Are you eating?" When she went 3 weeks without seeing him and the explanation was always reasonable and never quite enough. She told herself it was a phase. A transition. That he was under pressure and she needed to be the steady thing. She was good at being steady. She'd been steady her whole life. But there was a woman named Han Soyeon. Soyeon was exactly what you'd expect from this sentence, and Amara hated that she'd expected it. She was 26, from a good Seoul family, a former fashion communications director who had pivoted to brand strategy and somehow landed in Hyunwoo's orbit when his company started getting press. She was beautiful in the way that makes rooms shift. She was also intelligent, charming, and completely ruthless about what she wanted. Amara met her at a company event she almost hadn't attended. Hyunwoo had invited her, perfunctorily, she felt, like an item on a checklist, to a launch party for the platform's new regional expansion. She'd worn the nicest dress she owned, a dark green wrap thing she'd bought secondhand and had altered to fit perfectly, and she'd walked into the venue feeling quietly confident and then immediately recalibrated. This was a different world. Glossy and loud and expensive in ways that weren't about price tags so much as the specific ease with which people inhabited space. Hyunwoo was across the room when she arrived, and she saw him before he saw her. He was laughing, actually laughing, the real version of it, at something Soyeon had said, his hand briefly on her arm. Something moved in Amara's chest. She stayed very still. He saw her and came over immediately. He kissed her cheek. He introduced her. Soyeon shook her hand with a smile that was technically perfect and said it was so lovely to meet her, she'd heard so much about her. Amara smiled back. She had not heard anything about Soyeon. She stayed 2 hours, said the right things, laughed in the right places. On the way home in the taxi, she looked out the window and asked herself very calmly whether she was being paranoid or whether she was seeing something real. She was a practical woman. She made herself actually consider both options. She did not want to be the woman who burned something real over a feeling. But she also had not survived everything she'd survived by ignoring her instincts. She was seeing something real. And if you are feeling the tension right now, I need you to drop a comment below. Are you Team Amara or do you think Hyunwoo is going to wake up? Let's talk about it. And make sure you subscribe if you haven't, because we are nowhere near done. She didn't confront him immediately. That wasn't her way. She pulled back slightly, not as punishment, not as a game, but because she needed to think without the static of wanting him to be different than he was being. She answered his messages but shorter. She declined one invitation. She let herself breathe. He noticed. He showed up at her apartment unannounced on a Thursday night. She opened the door and he was standing there in an actual suit, which he rarely wore, looking slightly undone at the collar and like he hadn't quite decided what to do with his hands. You're different, he said. You noticed, she said. She let him in. He sat on her couch and she brought tea and they sat across from each other like strangers who remembered being something else. He said, tell me what's happening. So she told him. Not about Soyeon specifically but about the wall and the distance and the 3 weeks and the feeling of being managed instead of loved. She told him without drama. Just facts. Just how it had been. He was quiet for a long time after. Then he said, I didn't realize. I know, she said. And she did know. That was almost the harder part. I'm sorry, he said, and she believed him because she knew him well enough to hear when something was real in his voice. I got inside my own head. The company, the pressure, I'd been running on adrenaline for months and I didn't stop to look at what I was doing to us. To us, she repeated, testing the weight of the word. To you, he corrected, holding her gaze. To you. They talked for 4 hours that night. The real kind of talking. He told her things about the pressure he was under that he hadn't said out loud before, about Do-kyung, who had apparently noticed the company's rise and had made certain quiet threats through intermediaries. About the board meetings where men twice his age smiled at him with their mouths and watched him with calculation. About the specific loneliness of being in a room full of people and missing one person. She was that person. He said it. She didn't make it easy for him. She pushed back on things that needed pushing back on. She told him that love was not a background condition, it was an active choice, and that she needed him to choose actively or she would have to make her own choice. She said it calmly. She meant every word that he took her face in both hands and said, I choose. She believed him. She was almost right to. The thing about Shin Do-kyung was that he didn't just hold grudges. He engineered them. When it became clear that the company John Hyunwoo had built from nothing was not only succeeding but threatening to outposition 2 of Do-kyung's own investment vehicles, Do-kyung stopped being passively contemptuous and became actively dangerous. He hired a private intelligence firm. He started building a file. He was looking for anything, a legal vulnerability, a financial irregularity, a personal leverage point. He found Amara. Not in any scandalous way. There was nothing to find in that direction. What he found was the contribution angle, the fact that the platform's original model had been architecturally informed by her lived experience, her data points, her specific knowledge of West African remittance patterns. A lawyer in Do-kyung's orbit wrote a memo suggesting that if this could be framed as intellectual property appropriated without compensation or formal agreement, it could create a complication. Not necessarily a winning lawsuit. But a very public, very messy complication that would unsettle investors right before Hyunwoo's Series B close. Do-kyung called Soyeon. This was the part that Amara didn't know. The part that would surface later like something coming up from underwater. Soyeon was not just a brand strategist who had wandered into Hyunwoo's orbit. She had been placed there. A social investment, Do-kyung called it. A long game. He'd known Soyeon's family for years. He had financed her agency's early growth. He owned a quiet piece of her professional life that she had never fully found a way to pay back. And so when he called and said, I need you to stay close to the John situation, she had not said no. She had also, to her own complicated credit, not done anything overtly harmful. She'd stayed close, she'd watched, she'd reported back. But she hadn't manufactured evidence or driven a specific wedge. Perhaps because she had not expected Hyunwoo to be who he was. Perhaps because proximity to something genuine is its own disruption. Whatever the reason, Soyeon made a mistake, the kind that comes from conflicted loyalty. She mentioned the Amara angle to a journalist she knew. Just mentioned it. In the context of wondering aloud whether there were interesting untold origin stories behind the platform. The journalist was good at his job. He started making calls. Amara found out the way people find out things in the age of media, a notification. An online business column with a question mark headline asking whether the human story behind Seoul's hottest fintech was as clean as its public image. The article was careful, legally. It didn't accuse. It asked. But the questions were surgical. She read it standing in the university library, her phone screen very bright in the quiet room, her heart going very fast. She did not call Hyunwoo. She read the article 3 more times. She thought. She went home. She made herself eat something. She called her mother, who knew something was wrong from the first hello but was too wise to push. Then she opened her laptop and started reading everything she could find about intellectual property law in South Korea. She was practical. She was also, when necessary, formidable. Hyunwoo called before she finished her research. He'd clearly already seen the article. His voice was controlled but she could hear the current under it. Amara. Tell me you know this isn't. I know this isn't about me, she said. Someone's using the angle to get to you. Who? A pause. How are you so calm? I'm not. Tell me who. He told her about Do-kyung. The whole picture, finally, without the parts he'd been protecting her from because he'd told himself it wasn't her problem. She listened without interrupting. When he finished she said, "You have a journal." He was very still on the other end of the line. Yes. 2 years of documentation. Yes. And a corporate attorney. Yes. And you've been treating this like you have to fight it alone. A long pause. I didn't want to pull you into it. Hyunwoo. She said his name the way he said hers, fully, with weight. I was already in it. I've been in it since the night I knocked on your car window in the rain. The question is whether we're going to face it together or whether you're going to keep making decisions about what I can handle without asking me. Another pause. Longer. And then something shifted in the quality of his silence. She could feel it even through the phone. Something loosening. Something the wall releasing in a way that was different from that apartment night, more fundamental. Together, he said. I want it to be together. Then talk to your lawyer tonight, she said. I'll come over in the morning. I've been reading. He made a sound that was half disbelief and half something deeper. You've been reading. Patent law is complicated but I'm a fast reader. This time he actually laughed. The real version. What followed was not a quick fix. It never is. But it was the beginning of the turn. Hyunwoo's attorney, armed with the documented timeline and the forensic paper trail that 2 years of obsessive record-keeping had created, began building a counteroffensive. The original fraud, the forged documents, the bribed notary, Oh Sungji's signed testimony which they obtained through a separate leverage point the attorney had quietly held for months, was substantial. A criminal case was building alongside the civil one. Do-kyung had been confident for so long that he'd gotten sloppy. People who go unchallenged long enough always do. The Series B close was delayed, but not killed. Hyunwoo stood in front of his investors with everything on the table and gave a presentation that the room would talk about for months afterward, not because of the slides but because of the way he stood there, unflinching, and said, "This is what I came from, this is what was done to me, this is what I built anyway, and this is how I intend to finish it." Amara sat in the back of that room. She had not been asked to sit there. She had come because she wanted to and because she belonged there in a way that didn't require an invitation. After, in the hallway, one of the investors, an older man who had been in this industry long enough to have seen every kind of person, stopped Hyunwoo and said, "The woman in the back. Your partner?" "Yes," Hyunwoo said without hesitation. "She didn't move once during that whole presentation," the man said. "That's the kind of stillness that comes from someone who has decided you're worth it. That's rarer than capital." Hyunwoo looked back toward where Amara was standing by the window looking at her phone, completely unaware of being discussed. "I know," he said quietly. "I know exactly how rare it is." Seo-yeon came to Amara 2 weeks before the case went public. She found her at the coffee shop near the university that Amara frequented, and she sat down across from her without asking, and she said, "You don't have to listen to me." "I'm aware," Amara said. "But I want to tell you something." Seo-yeon looked, for the first time since Amara had met her, like someone who wasn't performing composure. She looked tired in a real way. "I didn't plant the article." I said something I shouldn't have to someone I underestimated. And I have been working for a man who I owe money that I should never have borrowed. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm telling you because you deserve to understand the full picture. Amara studied her for a long moment. Why come to me and not him? Because he would want to use the information immediately, Seo-yeon said. You'll decide what it means first. Amara was quiet. Her coffee cooled between her hands. Are you still reporting to Do-kyung? No, Seo-yeon said. Not since the article. I told him I was done. What did he say? Soyeon's jaw tightened slightly. Things that confirmed I made the right choice. Amara looked at this woman who had been a shadow in her relationship for months, who she had measured herself against in her lower moments, who she was now seeing, for the first time, as just a person who had made compromised choices under pressure and was now trying, imperfectly, to come right. She was not ready to call her a friend. She might never be. But she recognized something. Do-kyung's legal situation is going to get worse before it gets better for him, Amara said finally. If you have anything documented, anything at all from your interactions with him, you should consider your options carefully. The attorney on Hyunwoo's side is very thorough. Seo-yeon nodded slowly. She stood to leave. At the last moment she looked back and said, he talked about you, you know. In the early days of the company. Before he learned to keep things separate. He used to say there was someone who had seen him when he had nothing and chosen to stay. He said that was the reason he knew the company would make it. Amara said nothing. She held the words and let them settle. Seo-yeon left. Amara sat with her cold coffee and the complicated fullness of that moment for a long time. Shin Do-kyung was indicted 11 months later. The case was built on the foundation of the original fraud, the notary bribery, the forged equity waiver, Oh Sung-ji's testimony, and supported by 3 years of documented harassment through intermediaries, the financial trail linking him to the intelligence firm, and, ultimately, a deposition from Seo-yeon that landed with the specificity of someone who had been in rooms she should have spoken up in sooner and had decided it was not too late. The case would take more months to fully resolve. These things always do. But the outcome was clear early enough that the industry moved accordingly. People stopped returning Do-kyung's calls. His board removed him quietly. The glass tower in Gangnam got new signage. On the night the indictment was announced, Hyunwoo and Amara sat on the roof of his building. He had a building now, which was still a thing she was adjusting to, with takeout containers from the same Pojangmaka where he had fed her on her worst day, because she had specifically requested it and he had agreed without question. The city was loud below them. The lights were everywhere. He said, I want to tell you something. She pulled her jacket tighter. Okay. The platform. The original model. The remittance corridors, the fee structure, the user behavior mapping for West African markets. He turned to look at her. That was you. Not entirely. But significantly. I built the tech. You built the understanding that made the tech matter. I should have formalized that from the beginning. I should have called it what it was. She was quiet. I'm formalizing it now, he said. The attorney has the paperwork. Your contribution is being recognized properly, retroactively. Equity. Compensation. Credit on the founding documents. She stared at him. Hyunwoo. Don't tell me I don't have to, he said. I know I don't have to. I want to. Because it's true and because you deserve things that are true. She looked away toward the city because she didn't want him to see how much that meant and also because she absolutely wanted him to see it. She said, you know this isn't why I stayed. You know I didn't stay for any of this. I know, he said immediately. That's exactly why I'm doing it. She turned back to him. He was looking at her with that same expression from the bridge, from the beginning, before any of this, the one that was not compressed anymore but open, fully, terrifyingly open. Before the money, he said quietly. Before the company and the press and the suits. You knocked on my car window in the rain. You looked like you needed company, she said. I needed you specifically, he said. I didn't have language for it then. I have it now. She leaned forward. He met her halfway. Below them the city kept being the city, loud and fast and full of people building things and breaking things and choosing each other or not. Above them the sky was doing what Seoul skies do in spring, clearing at the edges in a way that promised morning. They stayed on that roof for a long time. Now here is what the story doesn't end with, because real love stories don't end with the resolution, they end with the continuation. Amara finished her degree that spring, top of her cohort, with a thesis on fintech infrastructure in emerging African markets that her advisor submitted to 2 international journals without asking her first because she said it was simply too important not to. She took a role within the company as head of African market strategy. Not because of Hyunwoo. Because she was the best person for it and they both knew it, and she made sure that was documented before she agreed. He proposed to her in the parking spot where his old Hyundai used to be. He had bought the building the lot was attached to, and he stood in that spot on a gray Tuesday evening when she was absolutely not expecting it, with no audience and no photographer, and said that he had planned something more elaborate and then realized she would find elaborate slightly annoying and this was the place that mattered anyway. She said yes before he finished the sentence. She also told him afterward that he should have warned her because she was wearing her old university hoodie in her engagement photos and she was never entirely forgiving him for that. He kept the photos anyway. Framed one. Put it in the office. The journalist who had written the question mark article sent a request to do a proper profile, the real story, origin to present. Hyunwoo forwarded the request to Amara. She wrote back one line, "We'll think about it." The journalist waited. They made him wait 3 months and then they sat down together, side by side, and told it from the beginning. The rain. The ramen. The bench by the Han River. The bridge at 5 in the morning when the sky was going from black to gray. The article ran with a photograph of the 2 of them standing in a parking lot, laughing at something off camera. He was in a suit. She was in her green dress. They were both squinting slightly into the light. The headline was, "Before the Money and the Fame." They had not suggested it. The journalist found it from a quote deep in the interview, something Hyunwoo had said about what it means to be seen before you've become anything the world recognizes. About the specific weight of being known before the metrics existed to measure you. About choosing someone and being chosen in return when there was nothing to gain from the choosing. "She found me before I was anything worth finding," he'd said. "She found me and she stayed. Everything that came after, I built it, but I built it knowing that. That changes what you build and how and who you build it for. She is the only reason any of it means what it means." The article got more comments than anything the publication had run in 2 years. Most of them were about Amara. Most of them said the same thing, she was the whole story. They weren't wrong. And if you made it all the way to the end of this story, I genuinely appreciate you. This is exactly what this channel is about, love that was built in the hard seasons, loyalty that didn't come with conditions, and the kind of connection that doesn't need the spotlight to be real. If this story moved you, if it gave you something, please hit that like button because it helps more people find us, and if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We have so much more where this came from. Drop a comment and tell me, what was your favorite moment in this story? Was it the bridge? The rooftop? The parking lot proposal? I want to know. And I'll see you in the next one.